This snapshot has the whole internet buzzing like crazy. Wait till you hear what this pup uncovers. Sarah was strolling home from her job when she spotted a dog hovering over a storm drain, its face drooping with a heartbreaking kind of gloom. Peering into the drain herself, she couldn't believe her eyes. The pooch had stumbled onto something downright jaw-dropping. Earlier, as Sarah ambled home from her shift, she passed by a little shop and noticed a dog lingering out front. The German Shepherd's glossy black fur shimmered in the light, and she couldn't help but stop and soak in how stunning it looked. What threw her off, though, was the pup's mournful stare, locking eyes with her like it was yearning for something as it stood by the drain. The dog's obvious misery tugged hard at her emotions, but she shrugged it off and kept heading home. She figured its owner was probably inside the store, grabbing a few things, and would scoop it up soon. Sarah was beat from her long day and just wanted to kick back. She didn't have the energy to pause and cheer up a random canine. But the next day, as she wandered down that same street, there it was again, the dog, parked over the drain, gazing into it with that same pitiful expression. This time, she'd planned to pop into the shop for some groceries, and as she got closer, the dog shot her a cautious side-eye. She couldn't miss how its whole frame stiffened up as she breezed by. Slipping through the store doors, she cast a quick glance back at the pup through the glass. Sure enough, it was peering sadly into the drain again. She started thinking maybe it was starving, and it knew the shop had goodies. That's why it was glued to the spot out front. Taking a closer look, Sarah grew more and more certain this dog didn't belong to anyone. From what she could tell, it had probably camped out all night on the chilly concrete right there by the store. The idea of this sweet thing roughing it alone on the streets hit her right in the feels. She knew she couldn't just walk away. She had to step up and help. First things first, she'd get it some food. She wanted to fill its belly and show it a little love. While grabbing her groceries, she tossed some treats into her cart too. They were mostly chewy dried meat strips, and she could already picture how much the dog would dig them. She grabbed a big stash, unsure when its next meal might come along. After checking out, she stepped outside, a bag of goodies swinging in her hand. Gently placing the treats on the ground, she flashed a warm smile and coaxed the dog to dig in. It stared at her for a solid minute, not budging an inch. She could tell it was still leery of her, so she backed off a bit. The second she gave it space, the dog darted forward, snagging the treats in its jaws. But then, to her absolute shock, it didn't chow down. Instead, it trotted back to the drain and started dropping them through the slots, one by one. Each morsel vanished into the dark below. Sarah froze, her jaw practically on the pavement, eyes glued to the bizarre scene unfolding. She couldn't wrap her head around what she'd just witnessed. That's when it hit her. She'd totally misread the situation. This pup wasn't hanging around begging for snacks from strangers. No, it was laser-focused on something down in that drain. What could possibly matter more to it than eating? Something was seriously off, and Sarah's curiosity kicked into overdrive. She was dead set on figuring this out. Edging toward the drain for a better look, she barely took 2 steps before the dog leapt up, letting out a sharp warning bark. Its muscles coiled tight, and it looked ready to lunge at her if she pushed it. Whatever it was guarding, it wasn't letting anyone near it. Message received loud and clear. Staring at the dog, Sarah suddenly clocked how it was braced to pounce if she so much as twitched wrong. A cold shiver of fear rippled through her. She'd never felt this rattled by a dog before, and it spooked her bad. Growing up, Sarah had been obsessed with getting a puppy. She'd hounded her mom for months, dreaming of a fluffy buddy to cuddle and romp around with. But her mom, a single parent scraping by with no help, couldn't swing the extra expense. She had to focus on keeping a roof over Sarah's head and food on the table, even if it meant sidelining her own wishes. Her mom broke it down for her gently, and over time, Sarah got it and quit asking. As she got older, her dog obsession fizzled out, until life decided to throw her a curveball. Years down the road, when Sarah was all grown up, her mom got hit with a terminal cancer diagnosis, flipping their world upside down. Suddenly, Sarah was the one taking care of her mom, doing everything she could to keep her comfy and happy in her last days, even as the clock ticked down. She dropped a ton of weight during that stretch, looking like a ghost of herself, and every penny she earned went straight to medical bills. When her mom finally slipped away, Sarah was right there, clutching her hand, tears streaming as grief swallowed her whole. She was slammed with the gut-punch reality that she was on her own now, no family left to lean on. Later that day, trudging home from the hospital with a heavy heart, she stopped short at her front door. There sat a scruffy stray dog, waiting like it had been expecting her. Its big, soulful eyes locked onto hers, brimming with a sadness that cut deep. It was like the dog was silently begging her to take it in, to give it a home and a little warmth. Its coat was a tangled, grimy mess, ears flopping low, tail dragging, classic stray vibes. Sarah's first reaction was pure shock, then a jumble of feelings hit her. She wasn't ready for a dog, had zero clue how to handle one, and sure wasn't in the headspace to take it on. But she was so drained from crying that she couldn't muster the strength to shoo it off, so she just ignored it and shuffled inside. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Her brain was stuck replaying memories of her mom. On top of that, a soft barking outside kept pulling her focus. When it got too annoying to tune out, she dragged herself up to check it out. Opening the door, she was floored. The same dog was still there, yipping quietly. She'd totally forgotten about it, assuming it had wandered off by now. Man, it had been pouring out there, and the poor dog was soaked to the bone. The air had a bite to it, and the pup's nose was dripping like a faucet. Seeing him in that sorry state crushed Emily's heart, and a little pang of guilt gnawed at her for not stepping in sooner. Without a second thought, she ushered him inside, and the dog trotted right over to plop down by the fireplace, looking downright pleased. She grabbed a cozy blanket and draped it over him, tucking it in a bit. For the rest of the night, she parked herself by the hearth alongside him, just soaking in the quiet company. It felt like they'd clicked without even trying, like they were two souls sharing the weight of their sadness. She couldn't shake the sense that their grief was the glue holding them together. Come morning, kicking him out didn't even cross her mind. This pup wiggled his way into her life, and she ended up calling him Buddy. She adored him to bits, and even brought him along when it came time to lay her mom to rest. Emily and Buddy waded through the murky waters of loss side by side, and somehow, that journey patched them up and made them tougher. Years rolled by, and Emily finally clawed her way back to something like her old life, pre-heartbreak. Then, out of nowhere, tragedy slammed her again. She couldn't wrap her head around how it had happened. She'd strolled home from work one night, picturing Buddy's goofy tail wag and big, happy grin waiting for her inside. But there he was, outside, eyes sparkling with pure excitement. Confusion hit her hard. She could have sworn she'd locked the gate, but something felt off. She was always so on top of that stuff. As she got closer to the street, Buddy spotted her and let out a thrilled yap, his tail whipping back blown into a frenzy. Emily's chest warmed with affection, and she picked up her pace to reach him. But Buddy couldn't hold back his joy. He bolted into the road, oblivious to the car tearing around the bend. Time crawled as Emily watched, helpless and horrified. The tires squealed, brakes shrieking, but it was no use. Buddy's body lay motionless, his gaze locked in an endless stare. Emily's scream ripped through the stillness as she raced to her furry soulmate's side. She scooped up his limp form, tears pouring as she pleaded for him to wake up, but he was gone. Just like that, snatched away. For ages after the crash, Emily felt hollowed out, like losing her mom all over again. Buddy, her rock, her confidant, was no more. She kept kicking herself for whatever slip-up let him slip out. If she'd just double-checked that gate, he'd still be snoozing on her couch. Eventually, though, Emily pulled herself together. She knew her mom and Buddy wouldn't want her crumbling. She had to keep it together for their sake. Back at work, she went through the motions, but everything felt off-kilter. She was managing, sure, but it was a slog. She even tried adopting another pup to fill the void, but the shelter visits just left her sobbing and bolting for the exit. No dog could ever be Buddy. She swore off pets for good. No more heartbreak, no more ties to canines, period. But now, staring at this mystery mutt by the drain, Emily's head was spinning. She'd pegged it as hungry, yet it dumped every treat she offered down that grate. She had to know what was down there, but from her spot, it was a big fat nothing. It clicked, she'd need a sneakier way to peek. Giving the dog a little wave, she backed off and headed out. He tracked her till she vanished around the corner, then went right back to staring into that drain. What he didn't know? Emily was cooking up a scheme. That night, she slipped out of her place decked in black, blending into the shadows. She crept back to the spot, praying the dog had clocked out so she could snoop. No dice. He was still posted up, standing watch like a sentinel. She edged too close, and he unleashed a feral bark that nearly blew her cover. Not wanting the whole neighborhood on alert, she spun around and booked it. Now she was even more stumped. This dog wasn't budging, and that weirdness lit a fire under her. She was dying to crack the case. But this time, she'd need a smarter play, something slicker. She'd figured it out. That drain was his turf, and as long as she was a stranger, he'd keep her at bay. Her only shot was winning him over, and that meant buddying up. She kicked off the plan the next day. She dubbed him Shadow. His slick black coat was too gorgeous not to name. After work, she swung by the store, snagged some treats, and offered them up. He nibbled a few, then slid the rest down the drain, same as always. She just watched, chill as ever. Day after day, she kept it up, grabbing treats, handing them over, calling him Shadow so he'd get comfy with it. He'd munch some, ditch the rest into the drain, and she'd hang back, no pressure. In under a week, she was finally breaking through. Max started getting hyped for Chloe's visits real quick. The second he'd spot her, his tail would whip back and forth like a windshield wiper, and those gorgeous eyes of his would light up, practically begging for attention. She'd swing by the store, grab some treats, and hand them over, and he'd let her give him a good scratch behind the ears. It was a sweet little routine, and neither of them clocked how tight they were getting. Before long, Max trusted her enough to let her inch right up to that drain. Finally, the big moment she'd been waiting for rolled around. Chloe was pumped to uncover the drain's secret. She hovered over it, squinting down, but it was like staring into a black hole, nothing to see. The darkness swallowed everything up. No hints, no shapes, nada. She wasn't about to throw in the towel, though. Dropping to her knees, she pressed her face closer to the grate, not giving a rip that folks walking by were gawking and probably thinking she'd lost it. Her mission was cracking this mystery, and that's all that mattered. Still, she came up empty-handed, until she caught something faint. A tiny sound, almost drowned out by the rumble of cars zooming past, tickled her ears. Tilting her head and pressing her ear to the drain, it sharpened up a bit. Soft little mews floated up. Kittens. A kitten was trapped down there. Her pulse kicked into high gear as she whipped out her phone and dialed the fire department, spilling the whole story and begging them to hustle over. The crew showed up lightning fast. The moment they pulled up, she jabbed a finger at the drain. They popped the grate off in a flash, and one firefighter leaned in with a flashlight, giving a quick nod. Yep, a kitten was stuck all right. But then came the real shocker. The drain was deeper than it looked, so one of the guys hopped down inside. He fished out one kitten, then another, and kept going, pulling out a whopping 6 in all. Chloe's jaw hit the floor as she gaped at the tiny fur balls. She couldn't believe they'd been down there this whole time, totally unnoticed by everyone else. The firefighters figured a big rain must have washed them in, and they'd gotten wedged tight. Chloe turned to Max, marveling at him. She saw how downright lovable he was. He'd clocked the kitten's predicament and refused to ditch them, sharing his treats and standing guard. He didn't trust just anybody to step in, and that's why he'd been so snarly at first. Now, with the kittens free, his tail was wagging like crazy, and he kept bouncing around, trying to lick her shoes. She led him over to where the kittens were laid out. A couple were looking rough, so the crew was getting them ready for a vet trip. People nearby whipped out their phones, snapping pics of Max and the little rescues. Everyone was blown away by how sharp he was. They knew those kittens would have been toast without him. While the kittens headed off for some TLC, Chloe couldn't leave Max out on the streets, so she brought him home. He seemed stoked to tag along, tail swishing the whole way. She'd lost Buddy years back, and Max was the first pup she'd taken in since. She was nervous he might not vibe with her place, but boy, was she off the mark. He went nuts for her house, bounding around so much she couldn't stop cracking up. It took her right back to her days with Buddy. Over the next few weeks, Chloe and Max were thick as thieves, eating together, tearing around the yard, you name it. They even crashed in the same bed. Her heart was bursting with affection, and she knew she'd found a new sidekick to tackle life's ups and downs. She was head over heels for Max, so she decided to make it legit. She sorted out the paperwork and adopted him officially. Meanwhile, the kittens all landed in awesome homes with families ready to love and look out for them no matter what. The internet blew up with shots of Max and the kittens, Folks couldn't shut up about his heroics and were clamoring for more. Chloe couldn't have been prouder of her boy. So what did you think of this tale? Would you have done what Chloe did? Got a pup of your own? Ever adopted one? How much does that kind of bond mean to you? Drop your thoughts below. If this story hit you in the feels, give the channel a subscribe and a like. Life throws us some rough punches, but if we hang in there, joy's waiting on the other side. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you in the next one. Have an awesome day.